So I thought I'd do something a little fun and a little stupid and make a phylogeny chart of the draconic clade from my novels. A quick shout out to Clint's Reptiles, who has been making phylogeny videos of real creatures that actually exist, and was the inspiration for this video. Anyway, without further ado, let's look at the relationship between the different draconic families. Now, all draconic animals fall under the clade Dranacimus, which means dragon-like in the Old Elvish language Illimaeus. For the record, all taxonomical names use Illimaeus. There are a few key features which distinguish Dranacimus from other members of the reptile clade. The most notable trait is the array of head ornaments that are a part of the skulls, different horns, spikes, or in some cases cartilaginous frills. As we will find out though, these are not present in all Dranacimus, as some species have lost these features over the years. Another noteworthy feature is the presence of a pair of bones near each of the shoulders called the palataltilids. The use of these bones varies per species, but in some of the most iconic cases, these are the basis for the fifth and sixth set of limbs. Other factors to look for when determining if you're dealing with a Dranacimus includes a third lung-like organ called the ventrale, commonly called the flight bladder, though in some species this organ has evolved into a third lung. But perhaps the most distinctive feature of the Dranacimus is their connection to the arcane. All members of the Dranacimus clade are considered greater beings, as they have within them the ability to harness true magic, though only a small handful of them are actually able to use that power, so don't be too afraid of a wyvern casting a spell to pull your insides out through your mouth and strangle you with them. It would just kill you with its teeth and claws instead. Anyway, the Dranacimus clade is broken up into two extant clades, and we'll only be going over the extant clades for now, otherwise this video will be 3 times as long as it is already. The first clade is the smallest, having only one surviving member, and that is the Dranaphasis, or false dragons. The member of these clades earned their name because even though they are Drana, they even look quite similar to true dragons, they are in fact very distantly related and share only the features mentioned above with actual true dragons. Perhaps the most distinctive trait of false dragons is their size. They tend to be rather small, especially in comparison to their draconic relatives. Even the largest within this clade, the Terra, now extinct, was only about the size of a 15 kilogram or 30 pound dog, though the dragon itself is only estimated to weigh about half of that, probably less. The only extant clade within the Dranaphasis is the Dranapseudo, which itself only contains the genus Pseudodranus, where the 4 remaining pseudo-dragon species, the red, the forest, the fairy, and the gilded, reside. Besides being small, another easily identifiable trait of pseudo-dragons is their skeletal structure. They have long, flexible vertebrae, and as a result, when they sit, their back curves similar to that of a cat, which is how they got their nickname, cat dragons. Pseudo-dragons are primarily insectivores, and usually only opportunistic carnivores, though some adults will prey on mice, voles, and colocolos. Pseudodragons are also highly intelligent. They are capable of using crude tools and are quite good at problem solving. Coupled with their small size, it's easy to see why they are so popular in the pet trade. Pseudodragons are even used by magicians as familiars due to their deep connection with the magic and their ability to learn and perform advanced commands. Moving on to the next clade, we have the Dranus, which literally translates to dragon. This ridiculous name is due to the many changes this clade has gone through over the years as biologists tried to figure out just how the different dragons are all related to each other. Over the years, many of the clades within this clade have been separate clades, combined with other clades, then some clades taken out again. As scientists began to get a clearer picture of how everything was related, the Dranus clade was formed and given the name to show how the dragons found within this clade are all more closely related to each other than to any other species of dragon. Anyway, the Dranus can be broken down into 2 extant clades. The first we're going to talk about is the Dranamerians, or water dragons. Despite the name, not all water dragons live in the water, but most do, which is why they end up having that name. Identifiable by their long serpentine-like bodies and short, if any, limbs, the ventrale of all but one of these genus of dragons have evolved into a third lung. So, like whales, they have to surface in order to breathe. And, fun fact, some of them can remain underwater for over 2 hours, which is a pretty impressive feat. Dranasmerian has 3 genera within it, the most distantly related being the genus Yormagnacerat, or omega serpent. These animals are so unlike other dragons that for the longest time they were considered a completely different clade, unrelated to dragons in the slightest. The palatatlids of these animals have fused with the vertebra and shrunk to the point of being barely recognizable. It was only after learning about the importance of the palatatlids to the Dranacimus clade and following the evolution of these bones in extinct Yormanga that biologists have been able to properly place this clade. Also, unlike the rest of Dranacimus clade, these dragons have lost much of their bony and cartilaginous facial features, and even bodily protrusions, opting for a more hydrodynamic design. What's more, their limbs have shriveled and nearly disappeared. In fact, without looking at the bones of one of these creatures, you would never guess it even had appendages to begin with. What's more, their limbs have all shriveled and nearly disappeared. In fact, without looking at the bones of one of these creatures, you would barely have guessed that they had appendages at all. Instead, they have very streamlined bodies with large flat tails that act as rudders while they're swimming. There are only two extant species of the Jormungandr genus, and it's not hard to know that you're dealing with one. Like their genus name implies, they're huge. Even the smallest of adults of either of these species, striped or green, often exceed 25 meters, or roughly 80 feet, and they're both filter feeders, so stories of them attacking ships are almost all made up, or more likely, the Jormungand bumping into the ship accidentally when it came up to breathe. However, there were some Jormungand Sorrente alive not long ago that did have teeth and may have attacked ships, if there had actually been ships around at that time, which there weren't. Jormungandr can be found throughout the oceans except for the Cryocene and southern parts of the Bailey-Lao and Lingqua oceans. They spend most of their time far out in the open ocean until breeding season when they all move to warm coastal waters, making it a popular tourist destination to come see them. The other Dranomarians are so closely related that they actually fall under the same subclade known as Gindolindus, which means great swimmers, despite the fact that only one of these genres frequently swims. The Gindolindus share their serpent-like body design with their relatives, the Jormungandr, but they have thus far retained many of the common bodily accessories that dragons are known for. They also still have limbs, two short forelimbs in this case that are used to pull themselves over land, and also, unlike their relatives, they are much smaller, usually only 5 to 10 meters long, or about 15 to 30 feet, depending on the species. The Lindmarians, commonly called lindworms or lindworms, live near water, often coastal, though there are freshwater species as well. This genus includes, but is not limited to, the short-finned, the twin-finned, the leviathan, the jagerdaust, and the bale-eyed lindworm. They have extremely fluid bodies with scales similar to that of sharks, which is to say rigid teeth-like scales that feel smoother than a cue ball if you were to rub your hand along them, but will shred your hand like a blender if you were to rub from tail to head. Their hands are webbed, though it's their rudder-like tails that do most of the work while swimming, and they spend the vast majority of their time in the water as a result, where they hunt for mammals, fish, birds, or really anything they can eat. As a result, they are considered quite dangerous, since even the freshwater species like the bale-eyed and the jorgaust have been known to attack Terrans within their territory. Attacks by saltwater species like the short and twin fin are much rarer and usually only occur if fishing boats were to enter the lindworm's hunting grounds. The other genus of Gindolindus is the linterans, or tatzelworms as most people know them. This genus consists of the pocket, the grave robber, the deep Terra, the evergreen, the savage, and the kumbak tatzelworm. Unsurprisingly, they look remarkably similar to their water-loving cousins. However, these tend to not only be smaller, averaging around 3 to 6 meters, or roughly 10 to 20 feet, though some, like the pocket tatzelworm, barely reach a meter, and they also lack the rigid teeth-like scales, and while their arms are short and stubby, they have relatively huge hands and claws for digging. Another distinct feature are their heads, which are much flatter and squished with a wide base around the neck, almost shovel-like in appearance, which makes sense since most of these worms live underground and wouldn't need great eyesight, and the shovel-like head helps them to burrow. Despite their choice of lifestyle, tatzelworms do still come into contact with people rather frequently, and their size and in some cases venom can make them quite dangerous. Thankfully, they are quite slow, and even the fastest Linterran is still no match for you in a foot race. Okay, and now we get to the dragons everyone wants to talk about, and are all so often referred to as dragons, even though only a small number of them are actually true dragons. And that is the Igninquater, or Fire Breather clade. Yet another clade name that is a bit misleading, since only true dragons can breathe fire. But at the time when this clade name was being decided on, only the true dragons were actually within this clade, so it made sense at the time. It was only after we learned more about the different genuses and taxonomy that the other members were moved into this clade, and now we have to just live with the decision to call all members of this clade fire breathers. But I digress. The first family within this clade is the Magnaotos, or Megamouse, better known as drakes, if only because that's the only remaining extant family within this clade. Drakes are the largest clade within the Dranossimus, with over 10,000 species, and they can range in size from about 3 to 4 kilograms, about 7 pounds, like the leaf or micro drake, to over 7,000 kilograms or 8 tons, like the gigamouth or highland drakes. Drakes have a lot of variety in appearance, but there are still some key features that mark them as drakes. The first is that the palatatlids on drakes have nearly melded with the furcura, and from the outside often look like a spine on the drake's shoulder, though in some cases the palatatlids have flattened to appear more like armor over the shoulder. They're also bipedal, a fact that has long led scientists to believe they were theropods, and as a result more closely related to birds and dinosaurs than to dragons. But as it turns out, this was just another case of convergent evolution. And of course, the most notable feature of drakes is their mouths. Drakes have a very unique jaw structure in that the lower jaw, or mandible, is huge in comparison with the rest of the mouth or even skull, which should come as no surprise considering the family name, megamouth. Some drakes, like the canopy drake and cave drake, have even evolved hollowed fangs and venom. The drake family is so large that it honestly deserves a video all to itself, and maybe one day I'll get around to that. But moving on with this video, we have the clade Owatlimbrundrana, the four-limbed dragons. This clade is so named because all the dragons within this clade have lost their forelimbs, but their palatatlids have all evolved into fully functional limbs. This may sound strange, but it makes a bit more sense when you understand that the palatatlids were already in the process of becoming wings when their forearms of their ancestors of these animals began to recede. And that's just how evolution works. If some function of a creature no longer serves a purpose for survival, then the species will slowly begin to lose that function over the generations. What is interesting is some of the species within this clade have begun to evolve finger-like appendages on the dravana, or as some might call it, the elbow joint of the wing. These carfan, or wing claws, are very strong, but not very flexible. They act sort of like ice picks, allowing the Atwan lumbrata, which have them, to use them to grab onto the sides of cliffs or rocky outcrops. Owatlimbrundrata also have a palatal valve. Like true dragons, but unlike their cousins, they cannot breathe fire. The first family within this clade is the Phylogeny, or wyverns, including the green, whiptails, the Jaeger, and both species of rock wyvern, the eastern and the mountain. Wyverns are generally large, even for creatures capable of flight, with wingspans of about 5.5 meters or 18 feet for the smaller green wyvern, to a whopping 10 meters or roughly 34 feet for the average mountain wyvern. What separates wyverns from other members of this clade are their large bodies, similar to that of drakes, and their enormous breasts, which are used to help power their flight. Another point to mention is that wyverns have small heads in comparison to their bodies, and while their jaws aren't particularly powerful, all wyverns do possess hollowed fangs and venom, even the least potent of which can kill you quite fast. The good news is you shouldn't have to worry about dying to the venom of a wyvern, since they would most likely kill you with the rest of their armaments far before you succumb to the venom. It might seem strange that a creature this large would even need venom, but when your preferred meals are things like griffins, hippogriffs, and rocks, it makes it a lot easier when you only have to land a single bite on your prey mid-air and then wait for them to die, rather than to battle it out in the air. Especially when wyverns are not the most graceful flyers. They also have fully functional rear limbs, unlike their relatives within this clade, which they use to pin any struggling prey to the ground before delivering the killing bite. But mostly these are just used for locomotion through their layers and for mating. And speaking of the relatives of wyverns, let's talk a bit about the other members of this clade, the Cerateladrana, or serpent-like dragons. Like all members of this clade, these dragons have 4 limbs. However, the rear limbs of members from within this family have almost all but disappeared. They only have spurs, similar to those of a snake, where their legs used to be. Members of this family also have elongated bodies and tails, and tend to be very serpent-like in appearance. They also tend to have smaller wingspans than their cousin, ranging anywhere from a bit over a meter, or roughly 4 feet, to about 3.5 meters, or 12 feet. The first subfamily within this clade is the Coatelas, or coatls. There are only 3 species of coatl: the crested, the prism, and the frilled. All members of this subgroup are easily distinguishable by their feathered wings, the only members within the entire Dranacimus clade to have feathered wings. The other way to tell if the Cerateladrana you're dealing with is coatl is to remember where you are, as coatls are strictly found only within the Western Hemisphere, within Ashutara and Maltit. Coatls are also the largest of the serpent-like dragons, with even the smallest, the prism coatl, reaching about 2.5 meter wingspan. Moving along to the other subfamily, we have the Thymberes, or Amphipteres, which has only 2 species within its genus, the black and the red, both getting their names from color patterns on their body, where the black Amphipteres have dark, basically black wing membrane, while the males of the red species have a gorgeous and bright red underbelly. Amphipteres are easy to identify not only by their coloring, but by their wings. The blacks have wings that look similar to that of true dragons or even wyverns, which is to say they have a 3-bone wing made up of the palatatlid, the venenoris, and the venoris, the inner and outer wing, respectively, while the reds have only a 2-bone wing structure, possessing only the palatetlids and the venosaurus. The wings of the red also run all the way down its body to its tail, which makes it a real treat to see in flight, as it looks like it's swimming through the air. And finally, we get to the moment you've all been waiting for, the final clade within the Dranacimus clade, the Dranavir, or true dragons. This group is unmistakable, as members of this group are the only dragons with a full set of 6 functioning limbs and the ability to exhale fire. It includes the Shindrana, or Longs, and the Dranas, usually just referred to as dragons. So let's talk about the Longs first, as it is the largest genus within the Dranavier, with 6 extant species. These species are the Zaoaoshu, the Daxianalshu, the Shaodlong, the Tianlong, the Senlinlong, and the Banelong. Longs were once thought to be much more closely related to snakes, but as we know now, that is very wrong. Longs have an elongated body, like snakes, but that's about all they have in common. Well, that and the fact that they're both reptiles. Or at least on the surface anyways. But Longs do have a rather unique feature besides fire breathing, and that is that their third pair of limbs have evolved into a set of working hands. The palatalids of these species have moved from on top of the shoulder to in front of the first pair of legs and feet. These new limbs are tipped with 5 fingers, one of which is a fully functional thumb. And yes, I'm counting the thumb as a finger because biological and medical textbooks refer to it as a finger. Anyway, while Longs tend to walk using all 6 of the limbs, they have been seen on many occasions walking with a pseudo-upright posture where they keep only the 4 rear feet on the ground with their 2 hands free. This is especially common when a Long is carrying something. Longs also have large eyes relative to their skulls, and based on what we know, are likely to have superb eyesight as well. Some studies have even suggested that Longs can see both infrared and ultraviolet light. They are highly sociable, living in groups that average around 50 to 60 members in a storm, and some of the largest groups on record have reached over 100 members within a storm. They are also quite intelligent, more so than most apes even. They can use tools and fire, and new observations indicate that they may be agricultural, or at least moving towards that sort of a lifestyle. So it may only be within the next tens to hundreds of thousands of years that we see another species arise as a civilized society. And last, but certainly not least, we have the genus Drana, which has only one species despite the variety of shapes and colors that they come in, the common dragon, or as most people know them simply as dragons, because they'd probably hurt you if they caught you calling them common dragons. If you somehow can't tell the difference between a dragon and a long, here are a few other key differences. First, dragons' third set of limbs have evolved into a 3-bone membrane wing. Second, their forelimbs have evolved into hands, though they are still tipped with claws, so be careful if you try to give one a high five. And third, they are even more highly intelligent than the rest of their brethren, usually far more so than even most Terrans. So if a Dranavier is talking with you, it's probably a Drana and not a Shindrana. And that's all the extant members of the Dranasimys clade. There's a lot more to go into on all of these subclades, but this video is long enough as is. If you would like to know more about any of these clades or any of the other clades of mythical creatures from the world of Terra Arcanum, just let me know and I'll see what I can do. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.